Imagine trying to write about the worst thing that has ever happened to you, but instead of writing freely, you force yourself to follow the alphabet, aleph, then bet, then gimel. That sounds absurd. But that's exactly what the author of the Book of Lamentations did. Scholars believe the constraint wasn't a limitation, it was the only thing holding the grief together. To understand why someone would grieve this way, we need to understand what was lost. In 586 BCE, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon destroyed Jerusalem. His armies burned the temple, the physical dwelling place of God in Israelite theology, and deported the population. For a people whose entire worldview centered on God's covenant with David's royal line and God's presence in Zion, this wasn't just a military defeat, it was a cosmic rupture. Every theological certainty shattered at once. The book is traditionally attributed to the prophet Jeremiah, but it's anonymous. The Bible never makes that claim. What we do know, someone who witnessed or inherited this catastrophe sat down and wrote 5 poems of mourning, and they made a striking formal choice. 4 of the 5 chapters are acrostic poems, a poem where each verse begins with a successive letter of the alphabet. In this case, the Hebrew alphabet, aleph through tav, 22 letters. Chapter 3 intensifies the pattern. 3 verses per letter, 66 verses total. This matters because the grief in Lamentations follows no logical progression. There's no argument building toward a conclusion. The alphabet provides external scaffolding when internal logic has collapsed. This wasn't unprecedented. Ancient Near Eastern cultures had a recognized genre called city-lamentations, poems mourning a great city's destruction after its patron deity abandoned it. Sumerian examples survive from centuries before Lamentations, but the alphabet is just a container. What's inside is almost unbearable. The book's governing image is Jerusalem personified as a widow, a once great woman reduced to desolation, mourning her former splendor alone. From that public metaphor, the imagery escalates relentlessly inward. Sacred gold scattered in the streets, sanctuary walls violated. Then it grows more intimate, children begging for bread with no one to offer it. And at the most extreme, mothers cooking their own children in desperation, the complete inversion of nurture itself. The voice also shifts throughout the book. Sometimes the narrator mourns about Jerusalem from outside, but sometimes Jerusalem herself speaks in the first person. He has worn away my flesh and skin. He has shattered my bones. That shift from third person to first person pulls the reader from observation into raw experience. The city isn't just described, it speaks, it suffers, it accuses. Now here's where it gets theologically complicated. 2 threads run through Lamentations simultaneously, and they pull in opposite directions. The first follows what scholars call the Deuteronomistic explanation, a theological framework rooted in the book of Deuteronomy's covenant logic. Obedience brings blessing, disobedience brings punishment. The poet explicitly says Jerusalem's guilt exceeded even Sodom's. Corrupt priests and false prophets are blamed. The ideology that Zion could never fall is directly attacked. Sin caused the suffering. God is justified. But the second thread undermines that neatness. The descriptions of God's wrath are so extreme. Children starving in the streets, women violated, elders publicly humiliated, that the reader's attention shifts from guilt to sheer horror at what's happening to innocent people. The punishment doesn't feel proportional. It feels annihilating. Scholars have long debated whether the book resolves this tension. The consensus leans toward no. Lamentations is not a clean theodicy, not a successful attempt to explain God's goodness in the face of suffering. It's a raw document of a community trying and partially failing to make theological sense of catastrophe. Both truths hang in painful suspension. And perhaps nowhere is this tension more stark than in a single devastating image. And the poet writes, "You have screened yourself off with a cloud, that no prayer may pass through. God doesn't merely punish and then listen to repentance. God actively blocks communication. In ancient Near Eastern city-lamentation traditions, destruction followed when a patron deity abandoned their city. Lamentations goes further. God hasn't just left. God has erected a barrier against the very prayers that might restore the relationship. Yet the book ends with a plea. Take us back, O Lord, to yourself, and let us come back. Renew our days as of old. That's not certainty. That's fragile, desperate hope. Lamentations wasn't the only response to catastrophe. It was one voice in a much larger conversation that unfolded over nearly 2 centuries. The Deuteronomistic history reframed Israel's entire past as collective punishment for idolatry, history as divine justice on a national scale. Ezekiel insisted God's relationship with Israel continue in exile and offered visions of radical restoration, including redesigned human nature. Second, Isaiah gave suffering universal significance. Israel had a mission to the nations, and its pain served purification. The biblical tradition preserves not one answer to catastrophe, but a sustained multi-generational argument. Lamentations occupies a unique place in the conversation. It's the voice closest to the raw wound, before explanation, before hope, before mission. It insists that grief itself deserves articulation. Before you can explain suffering, you have to survive it. Before you can find meaning, you have to admit the meaning has broken. Lamentations is that moment, structured just enough to hold together, honest enough to admit the structure isn't working.